It's been years since Infinity War came out. I think I can talk about Thanos snapping without worrying about spoilers at this point. So, Thanos snapping, turning things into dust, etc. We're going to be doing that to images and videos, and I don't care if it sounds like a spoiler, okay? You should have seen the movie at this point. Open up Wonder, okay? I'm going to be using version 2.92 alpha. You can use Sigma, Epsilon. That joke gets worse and worse every tutorial. Here's the workflow. Okay, so how are we going to turn pictures or videos or whatever into dust? First of all, we're going to make a plane. We're going to import in the texture on this, and then we're going to use that as an emitter for particles, is the, long and short of it, okay? And there's a lot of details on the way. So once we have our plane, go to shading. We're going to make a material. This is just going to be to have the texture on here, and then we're going to use particles to sample that texture, but just import in whatever image or whatever you want to import on top of it. I have an image just for the occasion, as it just so happens. It's me in this golfer pose. Now that's power. I've been told that this is my most dad-like photo, but whatever. Import in your texture on a thing. You could also do this with import images as planes, but now we're going to make a particle system. Now, of course, when we actually add in this particle system, right, it's just going to be doing the normal thing. We don't want that. We want all the particles to spawn on frame 1, and then we want the gravity to be off and there to be turbulence and stuff like this, and for the particles to sample the texture. So that's a lot of things. First thing, let's take care of this particle spawning situation. We can set the end frame to 1, and this is going to make it so that, all the particles spawn on the first frame, right? Because they have a 1 frame range to do so. And let's bump this up to 20,000 or something. By the way, for this effect to look really good so that each sphere is about the size of a pixel and all this, I recommend like 50,000, but it's gonna slow things down for this tutorial recording. So I'm gonna use a smaller number, but just know that it should be 50 or 100,000 or something. Once we have this, let's actually instance an object. So I'm gonna make a sphere with lower geometry because they're gonna be very small, so it doesn't really matter, right? I want each of these particles to, right now if we were to render this, it'd be invisible. So I want each one of them to be instancing a sphere object, just like that. So now we have a bunch of spheres, and then we also want to scale this down until we can kind of barely see gaps in our image, okay? Again, we can get this to be much smaller, closer to pixel size if we were to add in more of these. But now, dude, my mouse is screwed. I bought a new one, should be coming in soon, but this rotating thing is messed up unless I death grip the fucking mouse wheel. You can see that they're still falling, right? So go to field weights, go to gravity, turn gravity off. And now they're just going to be going upwards. Why? Because they have an initial velocity of the normal vector orientation, which is upwards, 1 meters per second. So they start off just going upwards, but that's fine. To get this thing to distort, you add in a force field. A bunch of these would work. I'm just going to use a turbulence, I think, because that's kind of the most obvious. And instead of default settings, we'll make it twice as strong. And you're going to see now it does that distorting thing. We can change settings here to get different strengths and rates of distortions, but whatever. Just pick something that you're happy with. Once we do this, let's actually bake this in so we don't have to recalculate it each time. Let's see. We want to cache. I'm going to call this available on Patreon because the one file is going to be available on Patreon, whatever. That's going to be the name of our cache, and I also want the particles to live for a bit longer, 250 frames, so they don't just dissolve. Hit bake. So reason we do this is so that we don't have to recalculate each time. So once this bake is done, we now need to just sample the texture and stuff like that. So here's what it looks like. It's going to look much cooler from the top, so you want to imagine that the texture is moving with this. And just for visibility's sake, let's go to our emitter, and I'm going to go to render, show emitter, disable that, and also for the viewport so we don't have to see the plane that it comes from, okay? So I want you to imagine that this is the image, and then we distort it, okay? So now the question is, how do we actually make it look like the texture, okay? Well, first of all, we're going to go to the shading workspace. Let's move this out of the way. And the thing about particles is you might think, okay, we select this, we change the material, whatever, but remember, we set the particles to object mode, right? Or to object mode, to instance objects, which is kind of object mode, which means that if we go to this, the instanced object, and make a material, this is what is going to affect all the particles, right? Because each particle looks like this, so if we change the material here, it's going to change it everywhere else, okay? So what's the point? The point is everything we do has to be on this sphere material that I'm going to call particles. For this one, we're going to import in the same texture as our original plane. It should import in a bit weirdly, right? Like we have this texture morphed of, wow, This is cursed. I might use that as the thumbnail. The image is just going to be wrapped around the sphere, and then as you expect, each one of these spheres is going to look like that. But to get this to work, two things. First of all, let's import in some texture coordinates. First thing is you want to enable from instancer with these UV coordinates, and second of all, you're going to see it doesn't do anything. You have to change to cycles since this is a cycles only thing. So let's see that in rendered mode. You can see now it's actually doing the thing, and we can actually get rid of this BSDF so it doesn't give us a bunch of shadows. Okay. So again, from instancer is what actually samples the textures. I know you're saying, oh, this kind of looks a bit painterly or kind of like Voronoi. It does, right? This is why I said like 50,000 or so particles. It's going to make it more and more detailed. But either way, just imagine that this is more high resolution with more particles. Now that these have been inherited from frame 1, you can see, I'm just going to go to a frame where there's more distortion, you can see that it actually moves with the particles, right? We don't resample a bunch of times. So that's the essence of the effect. At this point, if you want to like swap out the image or something like that, you just go to the image texture. Since again, the particle's already baked in, we can just swap an image. Here I have a dank meme. I guess if your image is a different resolution, you want to start off with like a different like plane size, but assuming all your images are 16:9, you'll be able to swap out really quickly. But you can see, this thing distorts, brings the texture with it, and then you could like fade out the video, etc. So yeah, just increase your particle samples, stuff like that, and I think that's the essence of the tutorial. It's a quick one, but it looks pretty dank.